how do you make it okay for
Mhm.
people to
Mhm.
speak the truth without feeling like they are going to get a severance package, in 2 weeks?
Welcome to Brave Proximity, the space where leaders and changemakers finally exhale, tell the truth, and get the validation they rarely receive. This is not a how to podcast. This is not motivational wallpaper or corporate comfort language. Here, the messy, is it just me? Moments become turning points. I'm Marissa Green.
I'm Susan Page, and we are futurists and practitioners who have spent decades inside turbulence, helping leaders who care deeply navigate culture, crisis, egos, expectations, and everything in between. We've seen the gap between what leaders and changemakers feel and what they're allowed to say. Brave Proximity is a place to close that gap. Each episode starts with the elephant in the room, often disguised as a pet peeve, and we follow it to the deeper truth underneath. We do not just talk about leadership, we get close to what leadership actually feels like. My question to open up today is, when did telling the truth at work come with a severance package?
I feel like it
Ay,
always
ay,
has,
ay.
unfortunately. I know we could not wait to get into this one for our listeners. I feel like this one is the crux of brave proximity and what can happen when you actually practice it, especially
Yeah.
inside organizations that aren't ready for it. And I think so many of us have examples of witnessing the quiet departure of the loudest person in the company, right?
Yes.
The person who everyone knows is saying the thing that needs to be said, and then all of a sudden you get the email that's like, so and so is chosen to leave,
Has
is
chosen.
departing, right? There's always a soft way of saying it that isn't totally honest, but helps the company save face. And I know we'll talk about a few other examples, but it makes being brave and proximate very hard in many corporate environments.
It is very brave to do this. And
Mhm.
it's brave because we are humans and we come with mortgages. We come with health insurance issue or, challenges. We come
Yep.
with adult care that we're balancing. And it's really, life is unfair. I think this one is a really big unfair piece because
Mhm.
especially when you sit in a function which, by now our listeners know that we have a background in human resources, whether it's consulting or working inside of an organization. And there's a high bar there.
Mm.
When I work with leaders, I feel like if you can't see it, then you can't do it. And so I need to be it. I need to be what I say everybody else needs to be in my
Mhm.
truthful way. I don't want everybody to do everything the way that I do. The other thing is when you said the loudest voice and that real but listen, that really is when I hear the loudest voice sometimes, not personally, because like I have been the loudest voice, as have you. And I feel like we should start celebrating the loudest voice because they are bringing the signals and signs way earlier. We
Mhm.
can save money by
Right.
pivoting quicker, solving quicker, but that term loudest voice carries so much negative weight with it. And
Mhm.
and that's what I hope eventually will change too is, hey, let's reward these early signal detectors and these people that are bringing to light issues before they spiral into a multi-million dollar challenge that we now have to solve
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
McKinsey or Bain or something like
Right.
that.
Right, because I feel like the idea of being loud does have such a connotation with it, and I when we do loud with good intention, that's what we're
Yes.
talking about, right? We're
Yes.
talking about
Yes.
being loud with the truths and that in a way that brings forward problems that need solutions before people are willing to see them, in particular cultural problems. But I think what happens so often, and I'll prompt you up for the elephant in the room in just a
Yeah.
second, but I think so often what happens is good people, and I don't mean to make this a commentary on good or bad, but people with good intention being louder, there aren't a lot of examples of that. And so
Mhm.
you have fewer people calling out problems with good intention. And therefore, when someone does it and does it well and with that good intention, it really stands out. And it stands out to the other individuals in the company who are like, yes, like someone said it and we really needed to know that. And now, it gives people motivation that something might change or that leadership might hear it this time. But
Yes.
equally on the flip side, right? On the flip side, you are now a squeaky wheel to the leaders in the
There is
organization.
no oil in the building either.
No, exactly. And all of a sudden the leaders hear you. They hear you. They might not digest what you're about to say. And
Yeah.
so it does feel like you become the spotlight. You now have a spotlight or a target on your back, whichever way you want to view it. And I think that comes with a lot of hardship. So tell me what, from your perspective, is really the elephant in the room around this.
Well, I think you teed it up so well. I mean, to me, the elephant in the room is that everybody in the organization or everybody in the room saw the truth being called out, and then everybody adjusted accordingly. And
Everybody else
whatever
got
that,
quiet.
yes, everybody else got quiet. And, let's talk about this a little bit, because I think that there is an instance of hope
Mm.
in the situations where I played that role of
Mm-hmm.
I can't sit with this anymore. This is
Mm-hmm.
bumping up against my values. This is bumping up against the company's values that they say they, believe in so
Mm-hmm.
deeply. Um, there was this glimmer of hope. And you know me, like I love to inspire people and
Mm-hmm.
say,
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm brave enough. I can say it. This is wrong. And so that hope, gets bigger, gets brighter, gets more. And then all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh. Like
You shined too bright.
I shine too bright. And then the people that had the hope are like, oh, false start again. And
Mm-hmm.
it goes
Mm-hmm.
even deeper into nobody say anything because the
Oh
last
yeah.
person that said something X happened.
Yep. Yep.
I
People
also want,
crawl back. Yeah.
yes, people claw back, crawl back, claw back. And another thing that, and we'll get to this too around the reframe, because I don't want people to be, it's a personal decision. It
Mm-hmm.
really is.
Sure.
But I also think about the way the economy is and how we have this view of free agency in the future as,
Mm-hmm.
we are our best branders, our best marketers. Sometimes we walk into organizations and we have no idea that any of these skeletons exist, that
Right.
somebody was put in this place. And I operate in a manner where I'm not going to be afraid that this has happened to somebody or is going to happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
There was a situation where I worked on a project with this brilliant individual at an organization. And when it came time to pitch the idea to the leadership team, I said, I want you with me.
Mm-hmm.
And this person said, oh, you don't
Oh,
know. And I said,
yes.
what? This person said, I'm not allowed. Basically, I'm not allowed to present because of one idea I brought 3 years ago.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. Like an
One idea.
actual, like, shut it off. I experience this a lot in my consulting work. And a lot of my consulting work, our clients will put us forward to share
Mhm.
the feedback or to share the idea, because then we
Yes.
can take the sword. And there have been numerous occasions where we have been on the spot for communicating something to an executive team level, that walking in the door, sometimes multiple people on the executive team were like, yes, we're behind this. We want this. We want to see this happen. Okay, wait, you consultants go and be the ones to tell the CEO or to even facilitate an entire conversation around the situation. And all of a sudden you start to just see them. They were so bold going in the room, but then once
Yes.
they start to see the reaction from either the CEO or other members of the executive team, suddenly they get a little quieter, right? It's a preservation
Yes.
of position. And
Yes.
to your point earlier, there isn't this is a hard conversation to draw a distinct line between right and wrong or good and bad,
Absolutely.
because our jobs are part of how we fulfill our livelihood. And there is a game of preservation that is necessary. It
Yeah.
just is. And so it is, I understand how it happens, but also being a witness to it and then also being on the front lines, like where you're like, well, we just got kicked under the bus again because we told them what really needs to happen and they just didn't want to see it.
Yes,
You
yes,
know?
and, I also go back to there is a responsibility from senior leaders to take the truth with the levity that it has with it,
Mhm.
and to examine why they are reacting the way that they are. The other day somebody said to me, instead of saying I'm so disturbed, like you ask yourself, like, why am I so disturbable? Like,
Mhm.
what is happening there? And so when we talked about
Mm.
this topic, it comes twofold is the
Mhm.
there's things that the individual that wants to bring to light these hard truths that may come with the severance package. It might not even come with the severance package. It might come with quiet
Mhm.
with loneliness for several years and no place to advance, but you're keeping a job in the meantime. But
Mhm. Yeah.
what I want to say, and I want to be very bold about this, is that should not have to be a choice.
All
If
right.
a right? How do
Mhm.
we that's if I could zoom out and say, if anything comes from our listeners listening to this, two things, tell us what good looks like, because there aren't that many examples of it. But then also make it so that this isn't a trade off, that
Yeah.
telling the truth and, getting to a healthier place in an organization is rewarded
Is rewarded.
yeah,
Mhm.
instead of consequences coming with it.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things we were talking about before this is that really the two sides of the coin in this issue, which is, one side, how does the organization create an environment that allows for these truths to be part of the way you operate? So
Yes.
rather than it being this loud voice with a spotlight or a target on their back, how do you actually create mechanisms for the organization to receive and hear these truths so that with the intention of helping the organization to get better, right? So we want to tackle some of that. And then we also, though, want to be a support system for the idea of the people who have the voice, who want to be part of that solution, helping to reframe and create some guidance for how do you do that more. And one of the things that I always come to in this work when you're communicating a hard truth for someone, when you're
Yeah.
whether it's an executive committee, one specific leader, maybe it's even a colleague that you need them to understand something. I think that sometimes we have a tendency to present that information without always thinking through the ways in which it's going to hit that person or hit that
Yeah.
group. And I think
Yeah.
what you were starting to bring up is everyone will hear that as their own individual human self. They're not
Yeah.
going to hear it as organizational culture. They're not going to
Yes.
hear it as a systems problem or a process
Mhm.
problem. They're going to hear it as I did something wrong.
Uh-huh.
And I think sometimes when we can remember that, one, as the deliverer of information, but also if you're a leader who sometimes needs to hear these truths, is being able to discern what is yours to own in it and what is
Mhm.
yours to help create a pathway to fix it. And
Yes.
I have found like leaders who are more willing to separate themselves and not make meaning out of it, right? Like you don't need to
Yeah.
make meaning out of what does this feedback mean about me as a person or a human being, right?
Right.
It is a piece of evidence that I need to digest and find a way forward.
Right.
And I in my experience, when we are so lucky to work with leaders or organizations that can view it through that lens, all of a sudden bringing forward truths and saying some of what feels like a hard thing becomes opportunity.
Yes.
It becomes a way to move the organization forward. And I don't always know how to create that environment, right? Some in a microcosm, but I think that we are starting to understand more of how organizations actually act like individuals. And we
Mhm.
have to remember that when we're sharing our feedback or when we are, as leaders, trying to create an organization that allows for that. There is a part of like settling our nervous systems to even
Yeah.
hear it
Yes,
is
so
a
that you
necessary
have the
part of the
right
process.
conditions. Yeah,
Yeah.
when you were talking about this, I love what you just said. I started thinking of this term disarming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is
Yeah.
disarming the person giving it, but disarming yourself too
Mm-hmm.
is, and it's like a flow, right? Is when the feedback comes in. I'm gonna tell you, if there's somebody out there that's like, when I get feedback, I'm calm. When it's okay. Show me, liar.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Yeah.
some of those
Exactly.
hard truths do hurt. However, it is, when they're coming from multiple data sources, and I'll be honest, when I've had to bring hard truths to light, it isn't usually just my experience. Like, I go
Right.
out and I talk to people and say, I'm struggling with this leader or this behavior or what happened. What is your experience with them?
Mm-hmm.
Nine
Mm-hmm.
times out of 10, there's nine other people that are saying, yes, that's just the way that leader is. And I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
no. But there's
Mm-hmm.
my data. And
Mm-hmm.
so at that point, that person has an EQ problem where
Sure.
they either know they're doing it, nobody's called them out, or they don't want to accept that they're doing it. So
Mm-hmm.
it is about disarming oneself,
Mm-hmm.
because that disarms then the person that is giving the feedback. In
Yes.
every situation where this has been something that, I've personally dealt with, or I've helped others and coached them navigate it, there was not one person that came in and said, I'm going to sue the hell out of this company.
Right.
That's not their
It's never someone's
primary
actual
goal.
intention. Yeah.
Yes, but what happens, I believe, is people get very litigious when they feel like they aren't heard, they're not
Mm-hmm.
seen, this is a pattern of behavior, and so when we get to the reframe, I really think we need to talk about how organizations need to accept responsibility and match their audio and video with what
Yeah.
they're doing and saying.
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely. And I think the other thing that drives people to become litigious in this is when they're retaliated against. And
Yes!
and you see that happen a lot. And now, it isn't always widely talked about inside an
Mhm.
organization, but once you've lived in the HR space, you start to understand the settlements that are happening behind closed doors, the other conversations that start to take place to try to protect the organization, but often it's because they're protecting a toxic leader.
Yes.
And really they just want the thing that won't be quiet to go away.
To go away.
And that's really
How
tough.
awful. Somebody
How
is here telling
awful.
the truth.
Exactly. And so to your point about actions backing up what an organization is saying or the video
Mhm.
matching the audio, I think this is where it gets really tough because I think inside a lot of organizations, it's become commonplace and sort of acceptable to be mediocre in delivering on the thing you said you wanted. And
Yes.
so, whether that's holding leaders accountable, whether that's making the words that you put in your values actually mean something inside the organization. And the thing that's sad about it is there are actual tested and validated ways to go about ensuring that actions match what you're saying. People literally, we study it. We've done it inside
Yes.
organizations. There are organizational design specialists all over the globe that
Yes.
know how to do it. And this is where the rub of, human-centered design, human-centered leadership, like actually where the rubber meets the road, because you can know how to do something, but actually convincing or influencing a leader to make that a reality is very hard. And it's also really interesting because I think that's where accountability comes into play. And sometimes it's easier to manage the loud voice that you just want to go away than it is to hold somebody accountable for something you've already said you wanted them to do.
Yep.
Most of the time, these hard truths are a spotlight on a gap between what an organization is saying and a leader is doing.
Yes.
And it seems like a spotlight people are oftentimes unwilling to see.
Yeah. Everything that you just said, it was swirling in my head too, as I was like, yes, she's saying that's exactly how I was thinking about it too. And I think it's one of the things that I like about the way you and I look at things is we try to break it down into very practical terms. And I know
Mhm.
human behavior is very complex. However, the principles of right and what good looks like are very simple. It's intentionality. Yeah, it's intentionality behind it, which is the hard part. I often, when I'm coaching leaders or coaching managers, I will say some of the simplest things, and they often will say, "Well, yeah, I'm already doing that." And
Mhm.
then when you peel the onion, they're not doing any of it. But
Yeah.
in principle, they're thinking, "That's so easy. Of course I'm doing it." But it's
Mhm.
more complex than that when you're actually putting the human in the space in the equation.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
let's talk about the reframe a little bit. We've
Mhm.
started down this, but there's two slices of the story here. There's what can the leader do, and I would maybe put the organization in there too, because senior leaders are, the representative of the organization, but there's also the individual and the peers that are surrounding this individual. In situations when this has happened to me, or I've observed this, when I've asked somebody what would be the best outcome, the best outcome is that whoever is causing the riff and the conditions that are making it extremely difficult to exist, they just want awareness of that individual and accountability, like you talked about. And
Mhm.
what wouldn't it be great if there was an apology for the
Mm.
way somebody acted? And
Mhm.
again, these are very simple things, but they take high IQ because you have to call yourself out and take accountability for behavior that I'm sure they know they're doing, but that's very hard for some individuals because we've talked about this in other episodes where leaders somehow think that they have to be perfect. They cannot
Right.
mess up. It's a
Can't.
life sentence if
Mhm.
anything happens. Whereas I've seen some of the most beautiful exhibits of growth come out of situations like this, where it
Mhm.
was a reckoning and
Mhm.
this individual said, "Thank you.
Mhm.
I have work to do."
Mhm.
It's the
Right?
lesser side of how these have turned out, but that is a beautiful, beautiful outcome.
It is a beautiful outcome, and it does take, a lot of courage and bravery on the other side, right?
Absolutely.
The same courage and bravery it takes to bring forward the gap and to say it with empathy, to say it in a disarming way, to be able to, like, even as a person, hold a little bit of like, "Ugh, there's some weightiness to this." It takes
Yes.
brave proximity on the other side for someone to say, "Wow, yeah, now that you tell me it that way, now that I can see what it is, I see that I've got work to do." And most of
Yes.
the time that's all someone is looking for.
That's
And
all that needs to be
that's
said.
all that needs to be said, right? I would also say organizationally this happens, right? If you're in
Yes.
human resources and you're a person responsible for taking forward feedback from the engagement survey and you're trying to really like shift the organization into a new pathway and you're the one sort of standing with this. I always like felt like I was the person standing with a big like billboard or poster board, or you know what, those things with the flapping
Yes.
arms
The
outside of the
the things
car dealer.
outside of car dealerships, like, you
I would
can't get bigger, you can't get floppier. You're like, "You're right. Hey,
I'm like,
notice me."
big sign, big sign. Like, I've worked with a couple of organizations where the big sign that we're helping the HR person hold up is, "Our hybrid policy is ruining things." Like, lately, that's been the biggest one that leaders just don't want to see, and they don't
Yes.
want the squeaky wheel talking about anymore,
Yeah,
but the truth and the data could not be more apparent that they just, like, need to have this sign up.
totally.
I totally lost where I was going with that whole
Well,
thing.
you were saying it's hard to deliver the message too. Like you were talking about engagement data where you're holding on to
Oh,
all of this rich. Yes.
yes, yes, so thank you. In the context of that, you're actually trying to shape where the organization goes,
Yes.
and in comparison to where, you're trying to get a leader to go, and so what I was gonna say is the way that that looks brave and proximate back to an HR team or someone
Yeah.
holding flopping their
Holding
arms
the floppy
around, right?
sign. Yeah.
Is to be honest in your response. So I feel like a,
Ah.
a lot of leaders might want to avoid that being the truth, right? So what they
Mhm.
start to say is, well, that's just one piece of data on one day. I don't
Yes.
really believe that everybody hates our hybrid policy, or that was one candidate who didn't accept a job. They
Yep.
basically start to pick apart the data and pick
Yes.
apart things. And I think for leaders in that situation where you're driving an organizational decision, just be honest in your response. Like, oh, I see what you're telling me in the data, but I personally prefer the hybrid policy that we have, and it works better for how I think we need to lead the organization. Done.
Yes.
Period.
Own your decision.
Own
Own
your
your
decision.
and why you're I love that. I love what you're saying is this is not an either or, it's an and.
Yes.
Every data set doesn't have to result in change.
Right.
We have to be brave enough to say, okay, we asked our people, and that's the first thing, right? Is
Mhm.
when you do something like that and you ask and you don't action a data set that's screaming at you, then you got to be brave enough to say why.
Right.
And
Just say why. And
yeah,
then it allows everyone to continue to choose. But this is the struggle point, right? The more honest you are about why you're making the decisions you're making, the more likely it will be that some people might go because they have
right.
clarity in the direction that you're moving toward. The other thing I think that would be helpful as part of this reframe is, we've talked a little bit about at the organizational level. One, be honest about what you are or aren't going to do about it in your true, perspective. The second thing would be, how do you create space for more of this to just be in the flow of work so that it
Yes.
doesn't take someone being super courageous to come and share you something? The HR team isn't spending 20 days trying to figure out how to position it so that you can actually hear it. And so I think there are some tools that organizations can start using. I mean, one that we used to get all the time, people love a suggestion box. As a employee experience person, I used to like cringe every time somebody asked for a suggestion box because I knew it was going to go into a deep dark hole and never be read. And so I believe in public forum directly to the people that need to hear it. And that doesn't
Yes.
mean like like a true in an auditorium like public forum. But how might you create space in each executive committee meeting to have raw insight brought by the HR team or raw
Yes.
insight brought by individuals from your ERG groups where
Yep.
it's almost like this bucketed safe space for the insight to be heard. And then the executive team, maybe there's even a world where the executive team doesn't even have to respond in that moment.
Right.
They can take a minute to sit on it and think about it and not be put on the spot and decide how they want to respond to it. But creating some of those mechanisms for the bravery to really land on the place where it should land, which is the people running the company instead
Yes.
of the people who can see something that they can't.
I love that. I also think that it one of the most simplest, most intentional ways to continue to keep a pulse on both the what and the how within your function and organization is to do skip level meetings
Yep.
and or walk the floor and talk to people. I tried so hard to coach leaders in a company that was not the norm to do some of that, and it you would have thought I said, "You're gonna get a stomach virus for the next year." It was the
I have to
most
talk to my people? What?
yes, it was
And
like,
you know
what am I
what? It's the
supposed to
same
say?"
on the other side though. Let's be real. If people there are some people who get really good at doing skip levels, but also when you see a skip level show up on your calendar, you're like, "Great. Now I got to spend
No,
a half hour figuring out how to communicate with this
what
person."
I'm supposed to say. Okay, so that is a good point, is skip levels, I've seen them show up, and it's like, you put the agenda out to the
Right?
CEO, and you're like, "What? Really? I don't know, that's not gonna work."
All of
But
a sudden the
yeah,
pressure is so high. Yeah.
yes, now the pressure is back to the individual that has some really great insight to say that could be really hard. So, but it goes back to thinking about humans as humans is the
Yeah.
power dynamic in those is very, depending upon how many skip levels, but there's a, an air in the room that's like this was going to be really challenging. So, but
Yeah.
how do you make it, and this is zooming out on this entire topic, how do you make it okay for
Mhm.
people to
Mhm.
speak the truth without feeling like they are going to get a severance package, in 2 weeks. And then the other
Yeah.
thing that I think about is, uh, I believe that the way that organizations are going to evolve is people are just going to be done with the BS, and
Mhm.
especially the next generation.
Mhm.
So I've often said, and I know you have too, is I've said, well, what happened to Joe? Because Joe was such a great thinker and did
Mhm.
all of these wonderful things. And then it felt like because he said one truth, now we don't see Joe anymore. And
Mhm.
so I do think it's okay to demand non personal reasons. If
Mhm.
it is obvious that somebody has disappeared or is getting, punished for something that they did. There's two sides of the story,
Mhm.
but, you know, that could be you the next time. And so I just think the whole thing is demand greatness. If an organization says they're going to be great, then hold them to that and,
Mhm.
allow them humanity and allow them to make mistakes. But if you keep letting everything slide, then that becomes the culture.
Then that becomes the culture. And I think then too, this is where from an individual standpoint, if part of our audience is finding themselves in the place of being the brave and proximate one and trying to figure out how to bring these things forward, you eventually come to a place where you start to realize that perhaps the severance package isn't a bad thing.
Yes.
And and that all depends on circumstances, right? It depends on job market, it depends on what your family is relying on you for. All of these different things enter into that conversation. But I think part of being brave and proximate is knowing when your bravery is falling on deaf ears and
Yes.
where the opportunity to impact change is not there. And that's
Yeah.
when you end up with either quiet quitting, actual leaving, or, somebody who just kind of goes about doing their business and not really impacting anything. And so I want to create a little bit of space for that to be an okay answer as well.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that that's a much harder answer, but sometimes you're just not in something that's actually going to be able to be changed. And I think
Yeah.
when you continue to get the same response or start to see that retaliation happening to people who are trying to drive change, just know where you are and make a
Yeah.
decision about how you're going to interact with it. Because at, I'm all about continuing course and staying on and be brave, be brave, be brave. But sometimes the boulder is just big. And,
It's
like,
huge.
it eventually falls back on you, and part of your own humanity and your own not even about preservation, but just thriving. Like, you
Mhm.
also wanna be in a space as a person where you are part of a culture that you can thrive in, and that you being someone who spots a pattern before somebody else is welcome and valued. Well, that might mean you gotta go somewhere else or create something of your own, and I know that that's scary, but it's possible.
It's possible. Okay, two things on that. Number 1 is I wanna say this very loud and clear for any of the people that care about financial results and
Mhm.
revenue. Um,
Mhm.
when you do any of those things that you just said that are because the climate isn't conducive to speaking up, and 'cause it is a boulder, you're not gonna get there. Any of those things that you said is a drop in productivity, which is a drop in
Mhm.
revenue.
Mhm.
So if you think that let me just quiet this person, I might keep them on, they can make their own choice. They're making a very intentional choice and it is not going to result in extra discretionary effort or
Right.
super exceptional performance. So
Mhm.
just really try to think about that as we zoom out and we say, what are we really saying? Are these soft things? They're not soft things. They're going to affect your bottom line. They're going to affect
Yeah.
your reputation and your
Mhm.
brand.
Mhm.
The other thing about people speaking up and going back to the individual, if you're holding something really heavy and you haven't said it yet, yes, do the work, analyze what's there, but also decide if holding it in is going to be more traumatic for you and
Mhm.
more career limiting than if you decide, okay, well, I have a position and I'm going to take this time to find what's next for me. Because in every situation that has happened to me that we're talking about, I have learned something so valuable that
Mhm.
allows me to find a much better matched project, employer, client, etc. So
Mhm.
always
Mhm.
think about the learning, but it is hard. These are very challenging situations.
Yeah. And these are just to kind of help us move to the end. I think this one has been such an important one that we'll probably have to come back to a couple of times to
Yes.
continue processing and having, because it's another one of those where we don't necessarily have a specific answer for how to address it in every circumstance. But we know this is the thing that just makes me laugh, but also makes me cringe, which is that every single person in an organization knows exactly what we're talking about. Even the leaders
Yes.
who don't want to hear it.
Who
Even
don't want to
they
hear
know,
it.
even they know that this is happening and that they are missing out by not having the trust and
Yes.
the disarmament to have the real conversation. And so I would also say, as far as Brave Proximity is concerned in the podcast, like, let's keep this conversation going. Let's not
Yes.
let this be the only time we talk about it. And I think to our audience, and we've said it before, we'll say it again, find us on LinkedIn, DM us. We're getting a lot of really good feedback, and also like loving the comments around challenging us on things, right?
Yes.
Like the executive presence one I loved. There were some people that were like, well, know your space. You've got to dress up, da, 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 da. And so I would love to have that from our audience for this episode as well. If you're part of an organization that's been able to create this space, or you feel like those gaps and hard truths can be talked about, let us know. Like, we'd love to highlight that. And also, if you have a different perspective or something that you want to challenge us on, like, let's do it, because we don't have all the answers. We're just trying to bring about the conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to read this line because we worked to kind of frame this, and so I want to leave listeners with this too. Is we said you don't get to ask for bravery in a system you haven't made safe. We're not in charge of making a system safe. That's an organization, and being brave in a system that isn't providing that support for the truth is very difficult. But on the other side, we say you don't have to wait for a safe system to know who you are and to believe in yourself. And I think that's really important. Is it gets really impostery in these moments, and that's why it's called brave. That's why it's called bravery, brave proximity here. Okay, well, I loved this episode, and you're right. Talk to us. Tell us what's worked. Tell us what doesn't work. We want to make work more awesome. Like we do. We want to make it support bravery and having these hard conversations, because that's how we'll elevate. So just zooming out on that. Okay, I say zoom out 1,800 times. I got to think of a new term, Mari. I don't know.
Parachute.
We're gonna up here.
Let's ask Claude to give you a list. I know. I have mine too. Our little idioms that we go to. Yes, this was great. Thank you so much. Hey, listeners, I'm just hopping in at the end of this episode because we recorded this back in April, probably. And since then, Susan and I have been working on something to help you through exactly this moment. The moment where you have a tough conversation, a hard truth that you need to share inside the organization, but you're feeling really afraid because the fear of potentially being retaliated against or being quieted is very real inside a lot of corporate systems. Not every culture, but a lot of corporate systems. And so we are super excited because we really feel like we're moving beyond just naming the hard thing on the podcast. We're moving into actually helping leaders learn how to have these tough conversations in order to influence real change inside organizations. And so I want to tee that up here because I want you to follow our socials, join our mailing list. All the links are in our show notes, because we have a few things coming for you and we don't want you to miss it.